Humbly offer my sincerest gratitude for his patriotism and selfless sacrifice. I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Call the roll.
Mr. Alexander. And the Senate's back. They were back in at 2 p.m. Eastern today after a week-long 4th of July break, making general speeches for the next couple of hours until at 5 o'clock Eastern Time, when they're going to turn to the nomination of a Wyoming Attorney General to serve on the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. We heard just a little bit about that from Senator Boozman just a moment ago. We are going to turn back to the conversation about the role that religion plays in American politics and culture today that we'd started during the last quorum call, and we'll show you as much of this as we can.
The question is whether or not a child needs a mother and a father, and whether a mother and a father bring something distinctive to the task of parenting. I believe that God did not design us simply to be parented, but to be mothered and to be fathered, and that the mother and the father bring something unique. And I think that's the reason why every human civilization has recognized that the flourishing of the next generation comes about best when both a mother and a father, whenever possible, are present and active in the care of that child.
Respond to this tweet from Peg, who writes in on this issue that you're talking about. The same arguments were about racially mixed marriages.
No, they really weren't. When it comes to the question of racially mixed marriages, everyone agreed that these were marriages. This is the union between a man and a woman, and that there were children who could possibly be the result of these unions. That's what racist white supremacists were trying to do away with. They were trying to keep the care and rearing of children from happening, and they were wrong. So I don't think there's a connection between these two things at all.
You blogged recently about explaining the same-sex marriage debate to children.
Mm-hmm.
What did you say to your own children as these issues were coming up in the Supreme Court cases that we've seen?
Well, one of the main things I want to communicate to my children is that this isn't a question of good people versus evil people, and I think there's sometimes people within conservative evangelicalism who would view people on the other side as being the villains here, a sense of outrage, a sense of persecution. That's not the case. What I want to communicate to them is that the people who disagree with us are people created in the image of God. They bear the dignity of the image of God, and they ought to be treated as such. But also to say we have a difference on what marriage is and why marriage is important. And I think that gives an opportunity for parents to talk to children about what they value. Why do we care whether or not marriages are intact? Why do we care about whether or not families are stable? And what are the differences that we have with people who disagree with us? And also to model how we can disagree without being unkind and without being uncharitable.
Back to the phones. Joe is from Elizabethtown, Kentucky, on our Republican line. Joe, you're on with Dr. Moore.
Yes, sir. I just wanted to say that I do agree that all people are created equal, and I do understand different decisions that are made because you can't legislate morality. But I do want to say this, and please don't, cut me off. I will not be disrespectful to anyone. But someday, God Almighty ordained marriage. It's in the Catholic Bible, Protestant Bible, the Quran. And one of these days, people are going to answer for what they try to believe gives them equal rights. And that's all I want to say, and I'll hang up and listen. Thank you very much.
Dr. Moore.
Well, I'm not sure exactly what he was wanting to argue there. I think we all agree that we must give an account for our lives. As a Christian, obviously, I believe that sexual morality means that the sexual expression is limited to the marriage relationship between a man and a woman in a lifelong covenant of fidelity to one another. Yes, and that's what the Christian gospel is about. But the Christian gospel is speaking to all of us as those who have violated the standards of God and says there's a means of reconciliation through the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Sherry's from Mansfield, Ohio, on our Democratic line. Good morning, Sherry.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to speak with both of you.
Go ahead.
I do have a specific question about the Catholic funds that are given for adoptions and other services. You seem to be worried about that, but this has bothered me for a long time. If you would depend more on God than the government, wouldn't you be further ahead? It seems to me like when the Catholics and Baptists and everybody depends on government funds, that they are being hypocrites, in my opinion. So thank you, and I'll listen to your reply.
Well, we're not talking about government funds. We're talking about the ability in Massachusetts, for instance, for Catholic adoption agencies to be licensed, certified by the government to be able to place people for adoption. That's not a question of government funds. That's a question instead of freedom to carry out its own mission. The same thing would, she's exactly right, though, that with government funding, there comes all sort of government meddling, which is one of the reasons why Baptists have been so reluctant over the centuries to take government funds. There's always the appeal to take Caesar's coin, but with Caesar's coin comes Caesar's restrictions, and many of us have been arguing for years, and our forebears before us, that's the reason that we ought to be independent of the state.
R. Harrington writes in on Twitter, Dr. Moore, is there a poll indicating the number of social conservatives who agree with the moral views you are speaking about?
Well, I think there are various polls, and I don't know that there's one that is a definitive study right now. One of the reasons that this is such an interesting conversation is that the dynamic is changing so quickly in American culture. I think sometimes we're dealing with old data and making arguments off of old data. I think that's a project that someone should do, to look and see where demographically Americans are on these various issues and what sorts of new coalitions and new alliances are forming.
For folks who don't know, explain the Southern Baptist Convention. How big is it? What's your membership?
Southern Baptist Convention is 16 million people, 45,000 churches. It's the largest Protestant denomination in the United States. Group of people who are committed to the gospel of Jesus Christ, to a regenerate church membership, people who know Christ and who follow Christ and who seek to covenant with one another in churches to do that.
Well, another issue you've been heavily involved in your new role at the Southern Baptist Convention is the mandate of the Affordable Care Act, known as the contraceptive mandate. Can you explain this issue?
Last week, Archbishop Lori of Baltimore and I met with had a group of religious leaders from every possible religious group. We wouldn't have agreed altogether on almost anything, but we agree on this, that the government should not mandate contraceptive.
Alexandra Pena and Lysandra Villa of my staff be granted 4 privileges for the duration of today's session.
Without objection.
Mr. President, on Monday, July the 1st, 2013, Joseph C. McQuaid was laid to rest with full military honors in the Fort Logan National Cemetery in Denver, Colorado. A proud World War II veteran, Joseph Big Joe McQuaid, will rest beside his brother John Hoocher McQuaid, also a World War II veteran. Joe was one of the most unique, memorable persons I have known in my lifetime. He was also my brother-in-law. Now, Joe was born on March 16, 1919, in the family farmhouse near Stewart, Iowa. A proud Irishman, Joe always noted that his birthday was one day before St. Patrick's Day. Joe, his 2 brothers and sister, were born and raised in a loving but very poor family. His father, Willie, was a self-taught, accomplished musician, playing the fiddle and piano in local bands around Iowa. From an early age, Joe was always known as Big Joe, quote, Big Joe, because he was a big bear of a man, standing 6'4" and tipping the scales around 240 pounds, all muscle and bone. He used to show off his strength by tearing phone books and decks of cards in half, like they were just pieces of paper. This always impressed a lot of young kids. Joe also liked to balance heavy, unwieldy objects like lawnmowers on his chin. But it wasn't just large, heavy objects. He's the only person I've ever seen who could balance a broom straw on his nose. So, what I'm saying is he could entertain a group of kids for hours by doing these kinds of tricks. When the Great Depression hit the Midwest, Joe's family, like so many others, was in dire economic straits. So Joe, at the age of 16, went to work in the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC. Now, the legal age was 18, but because of Joe's size and the poverty at home, Joe said he was 18 and thus joined the CCC. Young men left home, lived in CCC camps, worked on building dams and dikes, clearing roads in winter, cleaning up after floods, creating state parks and recreation areas. CCC camps were run in a semi-military fashion. Now, Joe worked in the CCC camps for 3 years, making $36 a month. As Joe remembered, he sent $30 home and kept $6 for himself. He often said that the CCC was President Roosevelt's best program. The day after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Joe went right down to the recruiting office and signed up for military duty. He joined the Navy and spent most of the war years as a boatswain's mate first class on destroyer escorts, escorting troop ships and cargo ships from the United States to Russia, England, and North Africa. His ship, the USS Marchand, sank several German U-boats and rescued survivors of cargo and troop ships sunk by enemy torpedoes. Joe was present at Normandy on D-Day, again protecting the troop ships and big cruisers from enemy submarines. After the war in Europe ended, Joe was sent to the Pacific as a boatswain's mate on a troop ship headed to the Philippines. During this voyage, Joe's ship was attacked by Japanese kamikaze planes. As the acting chief boatswain's mate, Joe got all the anti-aircraft guns manned, taking a .50 caliber mount for himself. They brought down all the enemy aircraft, and not one hit the ship. Joe remembered how one plane crashed in the water so close that ocean spray and parts of the aircraft landed on the ship's deck. Sometime after that, on their way to the Philippines, Joe piped, using his boatswain's pipe, he piped all hands on deck for an important announcement from the captain. The captain said that after dropping 2 atom bombs on Japan that wiped out 2 cities, President Harry S. Truman said the Japanese have surrendered and the war was over. There was unrestrained cheering and backslapping among the troops and sailors. Joe asked the captain if he should use his boatswain's pipe to call them to order. The captain said, "No, no, let them go." They refueled at sea and headed back to Honolulu. After nearly 4 straight years at sea, dodging and sinking U-boats in the North Atlantic, surviving kamikaze attacks in the Pacific, Joe was back in Iowa with a chest full of medals and his beloved boatswain's pipe. For his life thereafter, Big Joe could keep you entranced with his war stories, what shipboard life was like on a small destroyer escort in the frigid waters of the North Atlantic. Joe was so proud of his service and his fellow World War II comrades. He was truly one of the greatest generation of young Americans. Joe passed away on January the 31st, 2013, with his loving wife, June, by his side. He was just about 2 months shy of his 94th birthday. And up to his 93rd birthday, Joe always marched every year in the Veterans Day Parade wearing his original World War II Navy blues, a white sailor's cap jauntily placed on his head, a chest full of ribbons and medals, and his cherished boatswain's pipe hung around his neck. At age 88, he participated in one of the honor flights from Denver to Washington, D.C. for World War II veterans to see the World War II Memorial. After my mother died and Joe had married my sister Sylvia, I went to live with them, and Joe became almost a surrogate father to me. I was 13 years old. But as we both grew older, we took many trips together, and he became more like my older brother. Joe was so unique. He was a gifted observer of human behavior and interactions. He could fix anything, make beautiful objects out of wood, some of which I still have in my home, and he was the best storyteller I've ever met. Many years after my sister had died of cancer, Joe met and married June, a talented artist in her own right, and they had a wonderful, loving life together. Joe is survived by his wife June, his sister Mary Ann, his 4 children Teresa, Joe Kelly, Danny, and Mary, 4 grandchildren Sean, Ryan, Aaron, and Sierra, and 4 step-grandchildren Terry, Kristen, Shauna, and Dawn. So Big Joe led a full and challenging and interesting life. He was truly one of our greatest generation, a true patriot who loved his country, his family, and his many friends. He helped to make America a better nation for all. Mr. President, with that, I note the absence of a quorum. Yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
And the Senate's in a quorum call. They return today after a week-long July 4th break. At 5 o'clock Eastern Time today, they're expected to turn to the nomination of a Wyoming Attorney General, Gregory Phillips, to serve on the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. And tomorrow, C-SPAN will have coverage of the nomination hearing of James Comey to head the FBI. If confirmed, he would replace Robert Mueller, who served for 12 years under both Presidents Bush and Obama. We'll have live coverage of Mr. Comey's nomination hearing on our companion network, C-SPAN 3, and that will begin at 10 a.m. Eastern Time tomorrow. And while the Senate's in a quorum call, we'll turn now to a look at the progressive goals and agenda of MoveOn.org from today's Washington Journal.
From Denver by Anna Galland, who earlier this year became the new executive director of the progressive group MoveOn.org. And Ms. Galland, thanks so much for joining us. MoveOn describes itself as a community of over 8 million Americans who use online tools to participate in the democratic process. The first question for you is, how does one become executive director of MoveOn?
Well, first I want to say thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to conversations with the folks around the country who'll be calling in. And how one becomes executive director of MoveOn, in my case, was to be an organizer for social change for over 10 years. I actually got my start organizing, and the first time I encountered MoveOn was at a rally calling for, at that point, it was calling for the war in Iraq not even to begin. And there was about 1,000 people gathered on the steps of the Rhode Island State Capitol, and I at the time had already been organizing, trying to call out for a sort of nonviolent alternative at that moment in our history, and I was amazed to see this crowd. I didn't know where they had come from, and where they had come from was from MoveOn. MoveOn had used the internet to connect a far broader community of people to that fight, to that moment, than had been connected before. So I first sort of got acquainted with MoveOn at that time, organized electorally in 2004 and 2006, and then came to MoveOn in 2007, and I've been with MoveOn ever since. Most recently, I actually helped to launch the open petition site that we offer to our membership and to the broader public, which you can see by going to MoveOn.org, and anyone can start their own petition on our platform and qualify for support from MoveOn's 8 million members around the country.
And what sort of changes are you making at MoveOn as the new executive director?
Sure. Well, I think, you know, people probably know MoveOn because we have this really a history that I'm incredibly proud of. You know, MoveOn started in 1998 as one of the first big online petitions. Wes Boyd and Joan Blades started a very simple petition at that point calling for Congress to censure and move on. This was at the point when people may remember President Clinton was facing impeachment proceedings, and Wes and Joan were a couple in California. They weren't political professionals, but they thought that the country had been distracted for far too long from the important business that we needed to attend to, started this petition, and in a couple of weeks they had hundreds of thousands of signers. It was really the first big online petition. And since then, MoveOn has done just tremendous work to get people around the country engaged in our democracy, which is so vital, and you know, ranging from organizing as I first encountered MoveOn to oppose the Iraq War, to organizing fiercely to pass progressive health reform, to supporting President Obama at a key point in the 2008 primaries. And so what I've been excited to do over the last few months, working with an amazing team at MoveOn and with our incredible community of 8 million members, is to really open up our tool set so that MoveOn's members can run their own campaigns. So MoveOn has always had you know, incredible campaigns that we've run that our members have been part of, but what we're really doing is leaning into the brilliance and the creativity of our own membership. So we've had members start their own petitions and their own campaigns and qualify for support from MoveOn organizationally. And let me actually give you just a quick example of what that looks like. A MoveOn member named Robert Applebaum, who lives in New York, is a very thoughtful guy who's been concerned for a long time about the problem of student loan debt in this country. Folks may know this is a $1 trillion problem. There are students graduating from college into a weak economy where they can't get a good job, and they're just underwater from the moment that they walk out of college, at a university, at a community college. And so Robert started a petition in 2011, and at that time, student loan debt wasn't even really on the radar of the national conversation. It's hard to imagine that now because it's gotten so much attention in recent times. But it really wasn't a sort of signature national issue. Robert started this petition. It went gangbusters. We had 1 million people sign it through our site. President Obama cited this petition when he made an executive order that changed student loan policy for millions of students. And since then, we've leaned into this campaign, bringing all the sort of strategic resources and other all of our tech tools, bringing all those resources to bear to help to keep this campaign going. So I'm proud to say that our members are standing with Senator Elizabeth Warren in a proposal that she had made to make sure that student loan rates wouldn't double on July 1st. Unfortunately, that moment has come and gone. Student loan rates did double on July 1st because of congressional inaction. But our members have been standing with Senator Warren and calling attention to this issue. Over 10,000 of our members joined a special briefing call with Senator Warren, signed onto a petition that she started on our site, moveon.org. And we just actually, over the 4th of July holiday, thousands of MoveOn members around the country were out, some of them in their caps and gowns and holding their diplomas, rallying publicly around the country for Congress to do something to tackle the student loan crisis in America. And the reason I tell that story is both that it's an inspiring moment of organizing an action on the ground by citizens around the country, taking matters into their own hands, making sure that they see the change they want to see in this country, but also because it started with a petition. It started with Robert Applebaum starting a petition at moveon.org. You know, it's a fight that's gone on for long before that, but it really sprung into national prominence at that moment. So one thing I'm really excited about what we're doing is giving everyone in the country, our membership, anyone else in the public, the chance to come to our website, moveon.org, and start their own campaign that we can then back up and support and help to blow up just in the way that student loans as a campaign is blown up now.
We're talking with Anna Gallen. She's the executive director at moveon.org. Phone lines are open. If you have a question or comment for her, Democrats can call in at 202-585-3880, Republicans 202-585-3881, Independents 202-585-3882, and if you're outside the U.S., it's 202-585-3883. A question from Jewelry Maker Jay on Twitter just about MoveOn. What is MoveOn's tax status, if you can clarify how MoveOn works?
Sure. You know, MoveOn is it's a nonprofit for sure. We have both a federally registered political action committee, which is when we engage in electoral work, it happens through our PAC, and we have what's called a 501c4, which is a social welfare organization. Our average donation is about $27. We're a people-powered organization, and I'm really proud to say that that gives us independence from political parties. It allows us to be an independent voice that rallies around the issues and what our members care about as an organization, and to make the change we want to see in this country.
You talk about what your members care about as an organization. You mentioned some of your work in the 2008 election for President Obama, and 2012 as well. MoveOn worked for President Obama?
That's right. Yes, absolutely.
Can you talk a little bit about the current relationship between President Obama and the progressive community? Here's a headline from CNN from an article late last month. At progressive gathering, hints of anxiety about Obama. Talk about your relationship with President Obama, especially in wake of the NSA revelations and some of these other issues that have come up.
So MoveOn members are proudly independent and progressive. They are concerned about issues, and so it's really important to us that we stay independent from any political party or any individual. And so our relationship with President Obama is just like our relationship with any other elected official. We look for leadership from them. We support them when they take a stand on the issues that our members care about. So you know, in moments where President Obama has been speaking out passionately and from the heart and forcefully for the need, for example, for us to take meaningful action in the wake of Newtown or in the discussion about immigration reform, he has said he wants to see a pathway for citizenship for the millions of people in this country who are you know, currently living in the shadows. In moments like that, our members strongly support the president. And of course, in moments where he says things that our members don't agree with, we make that clear as well. Our members organize in moments like that as well. So one example, earlier this year, President Obama introduced a budget that didn't end up going anywhere, but that did include cuts to Social Security in the form of something called a chained CPI, which would change the way that inflation is measured. Our members strongly, strongly opposed that proposal, and they organized to speak out and make it known. Our partners at a group called Social Security Works organized an incredible series of actions, including a big delivery and rally in D.C., backed up by hundreds of thousands of MoveOn members. And so I think it's really important to say our members worked their hearts out for the president. They have a great deal of respect for him, and when he stands up on progressive values, they are right there with him. And when he takes positions that they disagree with, they're also, it's important for us to let him know as well in those moments.
What has MoveOn's reaction been to the revelations about NSA surveillance programs?
So certainly, we've seen from our members a great deal of attention to this, to the revelations that there's this blanket kind of vacuuming up of information from Americans. And MoveOn as an organization has joined a coalition called Stop Watching Us with the ACLU and the Electronic Frontier Foundation and other organizations that are essentially calling for both the Patriot Act to be reformed, for there to be accountability for elected officials who have supported this kind of blanket surveillance program. And we'll be certainly, I think, MoveOn members as well as folks around the country are questioning whether this kind of surveillance approach is necessary to keep us safe or healthy for our democracy. And I think you're seeing very interesting organizing starting to bubble up. Again, the way that we're structured now, MoveOn is a powerful community of 8 million progressives who organize together on the issues that they care about. So anyone can go to MoveOn.org and start a petition. We'll test anything that has over 20 signers to other MoveOn members to see what might be gaining traction within the progressive community. And I think the surveillance issue is one in which we're very eager to see what's bubbling up from progressives around the country, where we should be organizing to make an impact.
So would you disagree with this tweet from Laura? She asks, why isn't MoveOn screaming about drones and NSA overreach?
Thanks, Laura. No, I would encourage Laura to go to our site and start a petition calling for, whatever she thinks is the right response on drones and executive overreach. I think, MoveOn is made up of its members. We can only do what our members want us to do, but certainly I've been hearing a lot of concern on that exact issue, and I would encourage her to go start her campaign, and we'll look to support it and help to share it with other MoveOn members.
Robert is on the phone from Clinton, Maryland on our Democratic line. Robert, you're on with Anna Galland.
Hi, Ms. Gallen. Can you hear me okay?
Hi, yeah. Nice
yes,
to talk to you.
Good morning. Would it be possible for MoveOn to start a petition for a sit-in in Congress and something to get these people moving? I mean, we have a Congress destroying the country. I mean, there's no progress being made on anything. Because of their dislike, the Republicans' dislike for the president, they're willing to destroy the country to stop all progress, to let student loan debt double, to stop any type of legislation that would try to help the people who are not working and who need health care in this country. Is there anything that can possibly be done by MoveOn to go into Congress and sit there and just disrupt Congress? We're going to have to do something because they're bringing the country down. I just can't believe that these people who call themselves patriots are doing what they're doing. They're worse than the Taliban.
Well, Ms. Gallen, give you a chance to jump in there.
Yeah, thank you so much for your question and your concern. I think, first of all, I would encourage you, thank you for engaging and for paying attention to what's happening in Congress. I would definitely encourage you to go to MoveOn.org, start your own petition calling for whatever you think is the right tactic to get things moving in Congress. Sounds to me like you're sort of calling for Occupy Congress. And I think what I would point you to as an inspiring example, actually, of what is happening out there already now is in the state of North Carolina. So in North Carolina, folks may know there's been a movement called Moral Mondays that's been led by the state NAACP, and there's been protesters out there in the state capitol week after week after week, folks getting arrested, being pulled away by police paddy wagons, and these are folks from the faith community, it's reverends, it's students from Duke University, it's students from other universities around the state, and what's the reason that they're coming out so strongly there is that the state legislature has taken a hard right turn. They're passing these draconian, budgets. They're curtailing women's health issues. They're doing they've really gone to the extreme right. And I think what you're seeing there is an effective protest movement that is drawing attention to that extremism. Later this week, our members will deliver a petition with over 5,000 signers to Governor McCrory in North Carolina. And I think that's an example of the kind of citizen engagement and the kind of organizing that really direct action that gets at what you were asking about. Whether the same thing should be happening in Congress, it's up to our members and it's up to progressives around the country to make that happen if this is the right moment.
Richard is from Haverhill, Massachusetts, on our Democratic line. Good morning, Richard.
Good morning. Thank you, Anna. Nice talking to you.
Good morning. Good to talk to you.
Yeah, you kind of stole my thunder about the NSA and all that. But I just want to talk about Barack Obama. To me, he's not a real progressive. I mean, he got $1 billion from corporate America. He really is a corporatist. And, when he first got in the spring of '09, he did two things. Number one, Tim Geithner and he met with all the Wall Street bankers, and they got the message from them, you don't have to worry, boys. There were going to be no investigations, no indictments and everything else. Second thing he did, he listened to Petraeus. Rather than de-escalate and get out much sooner out of Afghanistan, he escalated the war. He did the same thing that Richard Nixon did in 1968. He had a peace plan, blah, 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 and then what he did, he carried on the war for another 6 or 7 years in Vietnam, and Barack Obama has carried on this war for another 5 years. So he's really not a progressive, but that's just my feeling about him.
Ms. Gallen.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think, it's important for us as progressives that are independent to speak up in moments where our elected officials aren't doing what they need to do to sort of make this country a better place. And I think, on issues around the country, you're seeing people speak up. I think that, like I said, on Social Security, that was one moment where we really saw an organized kind of outcry. And I think it's on all of us to speak up, sort of speak our truth, or, go to MoveOn.org, start your own petition, start your own campaign, connect with other progressives who feel the way that you do and can help you to amplify that message, help you to sort of raise that voice. One other example I actually want to point to that I think is inspiring, because I think in moments like this it's important to remember what's happening out there that's beautiful and inspiring and right. In Texas, people may know that there's been this incredible sort of showdown happening in the state legislature. The Texas state legislature decided that it was going to ram through essentially a very strong anti-abortion bill that would have effectively closed all of the clinics in the state of Texas that provide abortion services. And, Americans believe multiple things about abortion, but the majority of them, including the majority of Texans, don't favor an outright ban. And so because this was an extreme measure, the Texas state legislature had to call a special session, they had to change the voting rules, and they were still trying to just ram it right through. What happened was a citizens movement that grew up and spoke out strongly, was at the state capitol with hundreds of people lining up to give their testimony, and what you saw was then the emergence of an incredible leader in Senator Wendy Davis. She's a state senator in Texas who stood up and said, no, I'm not going to let this happen. She put on her tennis shoes, she stood up, and she filibustered for 10 hours on the floor of the state legislature. And this was a real filibuster, not one of the not one of the sort of threatened filibusters that we've seen paralyze so much of the business in Washington. But what ended up happening was she helped to defeat the bill, temporarily at least, and ignite a real movement, not just in Texas but around the country. So, we had MoveOn members said to us, we will give $250,000, individual donors. This is from 7,000 unique donors around the country, including many, many, many in Texas, who stood up and said, we want to support whatever Wendy Davis runs for next. We will support her run for whatever she wants to do after this, because she has inspired us. And I think that there's something important there. There's a tale of real leadership with a grassroots outcry at their back can change the course of history. And so I think, on the issue that you raised and all the issues that we care about as progressives, it's so vitally important that people take action, that they start a petition, that they talk to their neighbors, that they, you know, go on Facebook and get educated and speak out, that they go to rallies, that they connect with their neighbors. There's so many things we can do, even when things are frustrating or even when we disagree with our elected officials. And that's exactly what Move On is about. We're about empowering people to change their country from the local level to the national level, wherever it is that you are focused. We want to help you make that progressive change.
Well, Ms. Gallen, you bring up the abortion issue in Texas. Texas Governor Rick Perry was on Fox News Sunday talking about what's happening now on that issue. I want to play you a bit of that.
If someone wants to go with a national bill or even a constitutional amendment, that's their right, and it just takes a long time. In Texas, we're going to support protecting life. We're going to stand up and say that after 20 weeks, we are not going to allow abortion in our state. We're going to make sure that these health clinics are safe, that they are under the safety standards that any other surgical facility would be under, and that doctors have admitting procedure practices in place so that they can look after someone if that procedure goes bad. So those are common sense approaches. 10 other states have that as well. So this is going to pass, and you know, I'm pretty good at counting votes, and I think the support is overwhelmingly there in the House and the Senate. And we will get this done and get Texas back focused on the economic interests that are going on and creating jobs and leading the nation in job creation.
Well, Ms. Gallen, Governor Perry said in that he thinks this bill is going to pass in this special session of the Texas legislature. Your thoughts? What is Move On doing, continuing to do on this issue?
Yeah, well, I think Governor Perry hasn't reckoned with the kind of the force of the people's will in the state of Texas yet. I think what we saw, you know, as Senator Wendy Davis's filibuster in Texas began grabbing the attention of people, not just in Texas but around the country, a Move On member named Stephanie Ham, who's an amazing leader in Move On's community in Texas, started a petition on our site that quickly, overnight, had something like 15,000 signers, essentially standing with Senator Davis and calling for the state legislature to back off of this extreme position that they've taken. I mean, I think they understand it's extreme, and our members are organizing as a result in order to, you know, stop it. So what we're doing, there was just a huge rally, with one of the biggest rallies in recent memory in Austin. People are, you know, coming from around the state, driving in, and, you know, we had a plain banner flying overhead saying, "I stand with Wendy," to amplify the voices of all these Move On members around the country who want to see, you know, real democracy take its course in Texas and the people's voice to be heard. And so, you know, as I said, Move On members have committed to support Wendy Davis in her work, and will be actively organizing with our partners at Planned Parenthood and NARAL and others on the ground to do whatever we can during this next extreme special session to make sure that, you know, the right thing happens.
Roger is from Phoenix, Arizona.
You can watch that entire conversation about politics and the progressive movement online. Just go to the C-SPAN video library, cspan.org. The Senate's in a quorum call. They've just returned today after their July 4th break. And at 5 o'clock, about an hour and 15 minutes from now, they're expected to turn to the nomination of a Wyoming Attorney General, Gregory Phillips, to serve on the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. While they're in a quorum call here on the Senate floor, we'll turn to another segment from this morning's Washington Journal, and this next one is about the interstate highway system and the creation of the Highway Trust Fund.
In this segment of the Washington Journal, we take a look at how your money is at work in a different federal program, and today we'll spend about the next 45 minutes talking about the interstate highway system, its history, its funding, and how it's upkept. And we're joined to do that by Professor Jonathan Gifford, who oversees the Master's Program for Transportation Policy at George Mason University. And Mr. Gifford, thanks for coming on today.
Delighted to be here.
Take us back in history here and explain the creation of the interstate highway system, and specifically President Eisenhower's involvement in this issue.
Well, there's probably two key dates in the history. One is 1944, which obviously predates President Eisenhower's role, and then 1956. And 1956 is the date a lot of people associate with the beginning of the interstate system because it was when we got the funding right. In 1944, Congress actually created the system in law in the 1944 Highway Act. But it took another 12 years before the funding package was finally put together, and that created something called the Highway Trust Fund, which is still with us today in a weakened state, as we may talk about. But that funding package really was the thing that launched an aggressive construction program of the interstate over the next 25 or 30 years and continues to fund the system today.
You mentioned a couple of the key dates. Another one of those dates is 1919. This according to a story on the history of the highway system from the Tennessean. In 1919, the U.S. Army sent a truck convoy across the country using the only transcontinental road that we had, the Lincoln Highway. One of the Army's observers on that trip, representing the Tank Corps, was Lieutenant Colonel Dwight Eisenhower. The 81-vehicle convoy arrived in Oakland, California, 7 days behind schedule. It averaged 5.67 miles per hour throughout its 3,250 miles journey. They broke and fixed 88 bridges, had 21 serious injuries, and observed that most of the highway consisted of unpaved roads from Illinois to Nevada. Talk about how that trip influenced President Eisenhower when he became president.
Well, actually, 1913, 100 years ago this year, was the beginning of the Lincoln Highway. So we're marking the centennial of the Lincoln Highway this year that went from the East Coast to the West Coast, and it was a privately promoted highway. The 1919 convoy sort of stands out in history because Eisenhower participated in it, and he was president when the Highway Trust Fund was enacted into law in 1956. There's some folklore about whether the convoy actually influenced his thinking in 1956 or 1954, 55, 56 when he was president. But clearly it gave him a sense of the challenge of moving military material in that instance across the country. And it's also said that during World War II, his observation in Europe of the Audubon highway system also brought home to him the importance of a national highway system for military preparedness and response.
Well, let's talk about the interstate highway system as it exists today. It's about 47,000 miles long. 90% of it was paid for by the federal government. The upkeep costs are about $40 billion a year. The estimated cost, about $128 billion in the making. Talk about that maintained cost and how the government maintains its highway system.
Well, it's important to understand that the interstate highway system is a state-owned and operated system. It was federally financed through the Highway Trust Fund, but the states are the actual owners of the interstate highway system, and the federal government owns and operates very few highways. In military bases, national parks, here in the Washington area are George Washington Parkway, BW Parkway. Those are federally owned highways, in that case, the National Park Service. But the vast majority of highways are owned and operated by the states. And so the financing mechanism was that the federal government collected the revenues from a 4-cent per gallon gas tax beginning in 1956 that went into the Highway Trust Fund. The receipts of the Highway Trust Fund were then apportioned across the 48 states and then the 50 states and then District of Columbia and some U.S. territories in a formula, an apportionment formula that was based on the area of the state, the population of the state, the amount of federal land that is held in the state, because some western states have a very significant fraction of their land owned by the federal government. So that apportionment occurs, and then the states know what that apportionment is, and they can build in any particular construction season or in multi-year construction plan to say, okay, well, we are going to build these highways that are part of the interstate highway system. The federal government will reimburse us for 90% of those costs.
Well, again, we're talking with Professor Jonathan Gifford. He serves as director of the Master's Program in Transportation Policy at George Mason University. If you have comments or questions about the interstate highway system or want to tell us about your observations of the system as you're traveling around the country this summer, give us a call. The phone lines are open. Democrats can call at 202-585-3880. Republicans, 202-585-3881. Independents, 202-585-3882. And if you're outside the U.S., 202-585-3883. Let's talk about the health of the interstate highway system. Give us a status check today.
Well, the system is actually the most recent report from Federal Highway Administration, which is the federal agency that's really responsible for looking after the federal highway system and the interstate highway system in particular. It has a 2010 report based on 2010 data on the conditions and performance of the nation's transportation system. And the system is improving, but it's got, it's a 50-year-old system by and large. And so a system like that requires reinvestment. You mentioned the maintenance expenditures, the capital and maintenance expenditures on the system today. I think you said $40 billion a year approximately. So this is about a little more than $100 a person a year to maintain that system. The system is there. It hasn't been expanded very much. You mentioned it's 47,000 miles long. When it was originally enacted in 1944, it was about 44,000 miles long. So in the ensuing 70 years, we've added 4,000 miles to the interstate system map. The country's changed a lot in those many decades, and there's a considerable need to reinvest and to renew the system. It's not falling apart. There was a time in the 1980s when there was a well-known book, America in Ruins, that talked about our crumbling infrastructure. I think the picture is better today, but the federal funding part of that is in a lot of trouble, and we are facing a reauthorization that will be coming up for the federal program in the next year that I think is going to pose some difficult questions.
And is that the part that is funded by the gas tax?
Correct.
And tell us, is the gas tax keeping up with the money that's needed to invest in the system?
Short answer is no, not even close. And there's a couple things going on. One, the federal funding, the primary source is the gas tax. There's a diesel tax, there's a tire tax, there's a truck tax. But the main source is the gasoline tax, and that is a per gallon tax. So if you buy 20 gallons of gas, you pay 80 cents. Whatever, I'm not doing my math right, but 20 gallons at, I think, 19 cents a gallon. So you're paying about $8 or $4 for the federal program. But that doesn't matter if the gas is $3 a gallon, $2.50 a gallon, $4.50 a gallon, and it hasn't changed in 20 years. So,
or how many miles you can get on your car.
Right. Or if you're driving a Prius or another hybrid car that burns very little gas, or an electric that burns no gas at all. And so that's one thing, and the vehicle fuel efficiency has gotten a lot better in the last 40 years. So we're seeing much higher fuel efficiency, which means more miles per gallon, which is a good thing from a CO2 standpoint and for other reasons, but it's not a good thing from a highway finance standpoint.
The Congressional Budget Office put out a report on the status of the Highway Trust Fund. We have it here, showing it on the screen with the receipts, outlays, and balances of the Highway Trust Fund. Take us through what we're seeing here.
Yeah, well, I think if you look, I guess the light-colored line is the outlays, that's the spending. The dark blue line is the receipts, and outlays are exceeding receipts. That's fairly clear. The dotted line in the middle shows us the the boundary between actual that we've observed and what's predicted, and the big blue bars that are going increasingly negative are showing where the balance of the trust fund is going to go based on the gas tax current revenues alone. What that means is that the general fund will have to bail out the highway trust fund, or will have to bail out as a loaded term. We'll have to put funds into the highway trust fund in order to continue to support the spending levels that are, the outlays level that are predicted
to
there.
the tune of $90 billion in 2023. Is this something that the federal government has done before, bailed out the Highway Trust Fund?
It has put about $40 billion in general funds into the Highway Trust Fund in the last 5 or 6 years. That's a cumulative number there, so we're looking at a $95 or a $90 billion shortfall in it looks like 2023. So this is a significant, a significant problem.
Let's go to the phones. Dick is from Lansing, Michigan, on our independent line. Dick, good morning to you. You're on with Professor Gifford.
Good morning. My question would be, when Eisenhower built the highways, the states collected the taxes to keep their state up. And if you had a greater population, you collected more taxes. I'd like to know, when was it the states started sending all their highway taxes to the federal government, and then the federal government turns around and says, you don't need as much as you paid us, here's a little bit to get by on. When in the world did that happen, and why don't the states take care of their own roads?
Well, there's a lot of questions in there, and let me unpack that a little bit. First, I would like to correct something I think I understood you to say, sir, which is that the states are collecting the money and sending it to the federal government, and the feds are sending it back. In one way of looking at that, you can say that's true, but by and large, the states collect their own revenue, and the federal government collects its revenue. The taxes are actually collected at fuel distribution points usually, so it depends on where the gasoline is being shipped and sold, who actually collects the tax. But the states have a whole revenue system themselves, and in fact the states and the localities are very large players in road infrastructure and transport infrastructure spending overall. But there is an issue about the federal gas taxes that are collected in, say, Virginia or California and sent to Washington. Does California get back 100% of that, 110%, 95%? What is the return to each state from the federal taxes that are collected within its boundaries? And that's been a very significant political issue for the last 20 years, as the Congress has renewed the highway program on several occasions. We have some states that don't have a lot of economic activity but are very important from a transportation standpoint, and so they may not generate enough federal gas taxes to support their system. Some of the large western states that have a lot of federal lands in them don't necessarily have the amount of traffic or have vehicles that burn the amount of gas on their highways or purchase gas within their state boundaries to support their system. So how do you deal with those sections of the system? And that's been a question that's gotten a lot of debate in the last 20 years. Some of the denser, more urban eastern states traditionally were putting in more than they were getting back, and Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who was the chairman of the Public Works Committee in the Senate back in 1991, I think opened the issue of saying, what is the equity of sending more than you're getting back? Of course, if you got 100% of what you put in, there's really no point in sending it to Washington at all. You could just convert it into a state tax. Many states like having those federal taxes as part of their program because it is, there's a lot of interstate traffic that uses our system.
We're talking about the interstate highway system, some stats for you on how much it costs to build different parts of that system. I-95 from Miami to Houston, to Holton, Maine, $8 billion. I-90 from Seattle to Boston, $7.5 billion to build that. I-75 from Miami to Michigan, $5 billion. And the I-10 from LA to Jacksonville, Florida, $5 billion. Some stats on the longest interstate routes for you. The I-90 from Seattle to Boston is the longest at just over 3,000 miles. I-80 from San Francisco to New Jersey, 2,900 miles. I-40 from California to North Carolina, 2,555 miles. The I-10 from Los Angeles to Jacksonville, Florida, almost 2,500 miles, and the I-70 from Utah to Baltimore, 2,150 miles. We're taking your calls this morning as we discuss the interstate highway system. Ken is from Daly City, California, on our Democratic line. Good morning, Ken.
Yeah, how you doing?
Good.
You know, there's a big movement on right now by the privateers to privatize these federal highways. In fact, you know, they sort of sneak it in. I mean, out here, what they're experimenting with is letting people who want to pay use the HOV lanes. But it's the beginning of a privatization of our infrastructure, and I would really hope that all Americans would be up in arms about this, because this is something that is essential. I travel a lot on Highway 80, and it's a very important road. You know, it connects the industrial north of our country all the way across. And I mean, there's a lot of trucks on there and whatnot, and it does need a lot of maintenance. But the whole idea of privatizing, you know, I would hope the politicians would be honest enough not to take campaign contributions from these privateers.
Professor Gifford, something you've worked on is standards for some of these private efforts that happen on roadways. Can you talk to Ken's comments?
Sure. I think we are seeing a lot of growth in private investment in highways across the U.S. This is something on a global, you know, that's happened globally. In Europe, in many other countries of the world, there's a large amount of private investment, and that, of course, has to be paid back with a profit margin. And so it's a different funding model than the model we have used since the mid-1950s in the U.S. as a primary model. But I would remind the caller that prior to 1956, we saw a very large-scale expansion of highways in the United States, and many of the eastern, many eastern and Midwestern highways were built as toll roads and continue to operate as toll roads today. The business model and the organizational delivery system, Pennsylvania Turnpike is a state authority. The New Jersey Turnpike is a state authority. These are state entities. Virginia has been, where I work, has been a leader for the last 20 years in looking at attracting private investment in its infrastructure. So it's been a leader on public-private partnerships, which is the terminology that is often used to refer to these, or P3s. And there are some important issues associated with that. One is the issue of tolling, which is very, very controversial. We've had an interstate system that has largely been untolled. And so to come back 50 years later, 60 years later, and say, okay, we're going to begin to now impose tolls on these roadways, very controversial in the communities that they serve. Virginia has seen a very strong reaction to some proposals to put tolls on Interstate 95 that goes north and south through the state. This is an issue that we are going to grapple with. The flip side of it is that there has not been a lot of political support for raising gas taxes, for fixing the Highway Trust Fund problem that we alluded to a little bit earlier. So these facilities are expensive to maintain, and the money has to come from somewhere. Arguably, the users paying at the toll booth or through a gas tax are the ones that ought to be paying the bulk of the cost of that, because they're the primary beneficiaries. But it's either tolls or gas taxes. There's no free lunch. In this, you can squeeze some efficiency out of any program by doing a review, but that's not nearly enough to solve the problem.
What about
without objection? I'd be allowed to speak as if for morning business.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. We are now deep in the heart of summer vacation for millions of families and millions of students all across this country, and it's a wonderful time, something that families look forward to, maybe some parents more so than others. But it's a very strange summer in Newtown, Connecticut. It's the first summer that 20 families are waking up every morning without a 6- or 7-year-old that they planned on spending days at the beach or afternoons at the park or mornings getting their kids ready for what would have been their second grade year. It's a very different summer, this summer in Newtown, Connecticut. And a lot of people ask me, how is the community recovering? How are they coming back from this? And while there is some rebound happening, it is still very much a community in crisis. When students go back to school, in the fall, they're not going to be going back to Sandy Hook Elementary School. That school is going to be knocked down. We're going to have to build a new one. There's just no way that families, teachers, administrators can return to that place. And so once again this fall, the students of Sandy Hook Elementary School will be bused one town over to a school that was up until January of this last year, a place that none of them had seen, and they will once again be in a year of transition. Once again, for many families, still a year of crisis. And I'm not sure that any of those families could imagine in the days and weeks after the shooting on December 14th of last year that when they sent their kids back to school, their surviving brothers and sisters, in the fall of 2013. I don't think that very many of them could have imagined that in that intervening time, in response to the most vicious mass school shooting in this country's history, that the response from the United States Congress would be nothing. Zippo. Zero. This is a summer of crisis in Newtown. It'll be another difficult fall. But what really leaves people in Newtown shaking their heads is that this place has done absolutely nothing. That when their kids return back to school, the laws of this nation will be no different, will do nothing more to protect their sons and daughters when they return, as will millions of other kids across the country, to school in September. And it's not like we haven't seen since Newtown more evidence for why we need to change our laws. Madam President, I've come down to the floor virtually every week since this horrific incident to remind people that the tragedy has not ended, that since December 14th, 5,893 people have been senselessly killed by guns. 5,893 people since December 14th have been killed through gun violence. And so, Madam President, I think that we should continue to talk about who these people are, that we should give voices to these victims so that it's not just the 20, 6- and 7-year-olds that you have all heard so much about Jack Pinto and Dylan Hockley and Noah Posner and Grace McDonald. You know these kids, and I'll continue to talk about who they were and who they could have been. But every single day we lose about 30 more people to gun violence. Last June, we saw a mass shooting that was eerily similar to the one in Newtown, a mass shooting in Santa Monica, California, in which 5 people were killed, the father and the brother of the gunman, but also 3 completely unrelated and innocent bystanders who just happened to be in and around the school when this young man, 23 years old, deeply disturbed, just started firing almost indiscriminately and randomly on his way to and at the campus. It was eerily similar because, once again, it was an assault weapon, an AR-15 model, the weapon of choice for mass assailants in this country these days. And once again, he had high-capacity magazines, reportedly 1,300 rounds of ammunition were on his person. Now, every case is unique, but over and over and over again, these mass shootings are occurring with the same type of weapons and the same type of high-capacity ammunition. And we do nothing to acknowledge this trend. So let me just talk to you for a second about who these people were that were killed that day in California, because they have stories that aren't unlike the 5,800 plus stories that I could tell on the floor if we had time with respect to the people who have died since December 14th. Carlos Navarro Franco was 68 years old. He was the groundskeeper at the college for 22 years. He was dedicated to two things above all, that college and his family. That's what the president of the college said after his death. Everything Carlos did was for the college and for his family. He was truly a family man. The president of the college said he was a dedicated husband and father, an integral part of Santa Monica College's family. He dedicated his work to the campus grounds and was enjoyed by students and visitors for 2 decades. He was with his daughter that day, Marcela Franco, who was 26 years old. She was pursuing a degree in psychology at California State University. She had registered to take summer classes at the school where her father worked, and she was on her way with her father to buy textbooks that day. She initially survived the gunfire, but she never regained consciousness after the attack. She was described by her aunt as smart, beautiful, and outgoing. Her aunt said, quote, she was Daddy's girl. So the blessing is they went together. Margarita Gomez was the same age as Carlos Navarro Franco. She lost her life that day. She was very fondly referred to on campus as the recycle lady, because you could see her almost every weekday walking around campus, rolling her cart, picking up used bottles and cans, plopping them in her cart, and then bringing them to get recycled. Obviously, most people thought that she was homeless and that she was collecting these bottles and cans as a means to be able to survive. It wasn't the case. She had actually been diagnosed with diabetes, and it was her doctor's recommendation that she exercise more. She was also an active member of the Senior Latino Club that met every Thursday at Virginia Avenue Park. And she was very interested in the St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital cause, a charity that the Senior Latino Club happened to give money to. And so she put these two things together, a recommendation that she should exercise more and an interest in helping this club and the charity that it was affiliated with. And so she decided that she would take this cart, take it around town for exercise, pick up cans and bottles, recycle them, and donate the money to charity. The recycle lady, Margarita Gomez, was walking around campus that day picking up cans and bottles so that she could take the money to help sick kids, and she was gunned down by an assault weapon using high-capacity ammunition clips. It's a pretty unbelievable story. These three special individuals, along with the father and the son, are amongst the 500, 8,093. But, Madam President, it's not just the mass shootings that we're talking about here. Frankly, the vast, vast majority of these killings are one-off deals over some of the most petty arguments or disputes you could imagine. But because guns are so easily found, so readily accessible in our neighborhoods, these silly arguments end up in deaths, like one that happened in my state of Connecticut just a couple weeks ago on June 16th. Isaac Smith was a couple days away from graduating New Britain High School. He was a great athlete, played football and baseball, and he was hoping to continue playing those sports after high school as he went to college. He talked to his friends a lot, apparently, about how proud he was going to be to graduate. Well, on the night of June 16th, police received a call around midnight of gunshots. They arrived at the scene and found Isaac Smith a couple days away from graduation in his driveway with a gunshot wound to the back of his head. Police are still trying to figure out what happened, but apparently he was involved in a transaction for a pair of high-end sneakers. when something went wrong and the other guy that he was either selling the sneakers to or buying the sneakers from, 26-year-old Jonathan Gibbs of Meriden, shot him over a pair of sneakers. That's who these 5,893 people are. They're victims of mass violence. They're victims of senseless gunfire. But they all share something in common, which is that they deserve a response from the United States Senate and the House of Representatives. They deserve us doing something more than nothing. Now, at least the Senate brought a bill up on the floor earlier this year. We got 55 votes for a bill that wasn't perfect, but at least said that, you know what, criminals shouldn't have guns, and we should have a system that makes sure that that's the case, that, you know, gun trafficking, when you buy a mess load of guns legally and then you sell them illegally on the streets of our cities, that should probably be a federal crime, that we should have more resources in our mental health system to take care of people who want and need help. We got 55 votes for that. It's pretty unbelievable given the fact that 80% to 90% of the American public support all of those things. You think we could get more than 55 votes, but the House of Representatives has done nothing at all, hasn't even had a debate. And these numbers will just continue to mount. Next week I'll be down here and the number will probably be north of 6,000, and then back after the October recess it'll be creeping up to 7,000. And you know what? We can't get rid of every single one of these deaths. I'll admit to you, this guy Jonathan Gibbs who shot Isaac Smith, he was a legal gun owner. He didn't actually have a criminal history. But the fact is that, well, not every single one of these deaths is preventable. Many of them are. Many of them are. And so, Madam President, I'll continue to come down and talk about these voices of victims with the hope that someday, perhaps this fall, perhaps next year, perhaps the year after, we can take action in the United States Senate that will not stop the rate of growth of this number, but will at least slow its acceleration. I yield back the floor, and I'd note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
And the Senate back in a quorum call. They return today after a week-long 4th of July break, and in about 40 minutes, 5 o'clock Eastern Time, they're expected to turn to the nomination of a Wyoming Attorney General, Gregory Phillips, to serve on the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. And over on the other side of the Capitol today, the House gavelled in and out. They'll be working this week on spending bills for energy and water projects for fiscal year 2014, and off the floor in the House working on a strategy to bring immigration legislation to the floor. We'll take a look now at some of the tweets coming through. Actually, we're going to go back now to the floor.
Loans doubled on July 1st. Because Congress failed to act, our lowest income students are now paying twice as much on these new loans. And while students are paying more, the federal government is boosting its own profits. $51 billion in profits from the student loan programs in 2013 alone. This is just plain wrong. The government is making obscene profits on these loans, profits we can and should cut back on to help our kids who are struggling to pay for college. But Republicans have repeatedly blocked our efforts to get a short-term fix that would save students from higher interest rates. This week, the Senate will vote to fix this problem. The bill, the Keeping Student Loans Affordable Act, was introduced by Senators Jack Reed and Kay Hagan. It would drop the rate on direct student loans back down to 3.4% for 1 year, retroactively as of July 1st, and give Congress time to develop a plan to do the three things we really need to do: reform student loan debt, interest rates on the new loans, refinance $1 trillion in existing debt, and lower college costs for all of our kids. Republicans have a different approach. Despite the obscene profits of the current program, they propose to make even more money from students. Their current proposal would bring in an extra $1 billion in profits off the backs of our students. Listen to the numbers. New loans will produce $184 billion in profits for the U.S. government over the next 10 years. That includes the 6.8% interest on direct loans, all the borrowing costs, all the administrative costs, and all the bad debt losses for the program. Let me say that again. The new student loans, including the direct loans at 6.8%, will make $184 billion in profits from the government over the next 10 years. And the Republican solution is to increase those profits for the U.S. government. In other words, their solution to the rising interest rate problem is to make the students pay even more. Some of my colleagues are telling students that the plan they have is a great deal, but their argument is the same argument that was used by the slick operators who sold teaser rate mortgages and the ones who sold zero interest rate credit cards. Sure, the first couple of years will be cheaper, but they don't want anyone to look at what happens after that. Fortunately, our students are smarter than that. They read the fine print. They know that in the end, this debate boils down to simple math. Math that our students understand, even if some people in Congress wish that they didn't. Our students sent a letter to Majority Leader Reid and Minority Leader McConnell with a clear message. A bad deal is worse than no deal at all. Our students need a plan that costs them less money, not a plan that costs them more. I talk a lot about math, but the Senate's decision about student loans is a decision about our values and a decision about how we build a future. Investing in our students will allow them to get good jobs and give them a shot to make it in America. But that same investment will also create new industries and grow the economy for everyone. We shouldn't treat our students like a profit center. We shouldn't ask them to pay an extra tax to go to school. And we shouldn't try to trick them by shuffling numbers around, hitting them with teaser rates, and declaring that a problem is solved, while the students just keep paying more and more. There are real problems in higher education today: skyrocketing college costs, historic levels of student debt, and high borrowing rates. It's going to take time to develop a solution that really works. And there's no magic math that will make student loan profits disappear or make college tuition shrink without some sacrifice. But right now, students are the only ones who are sacrificing. They are giving up the dream of owning a home or being able to retire just so they can keep paying for college. Congress can ease the burden on our students, And we should be committed to doing just that, because this is how we build a stronger middle class. This is how we build a better future for our entire country. It's a first step, but it's a good one. Congress can pass the Keeping Student Loans Affordable Act. It's a short-term patch to keep the interest rates on new loans from doubling for 1 year, while Congress develops a plan to reform student loans and to make college more affordable. I support the measure, and I urge my colleagues to do the same. Thank you, Madam President. I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
And back in a quorum call here on the Senate floor. Earlier today, Majority Leader Harry Reid also talked about student loan interest rates when he first took the floor. And House Democratic Leader Nancy Pelosi weighed in today as well, saying in a statement, quote, America's students and middle class face another Republican-manufactured crisis. And she went on to say Democrats are ready and eager to resolve the crisis. And Republicans also gathered briefly with students on the steps of the Capitol about 20 minutes ago. They said they've already passed a bill and any further action is up to the Senate and the President. And you can see those statements online at the C-SPAN video library if you missed any of those. We're going to take a look now at some of the tweets coming across from members of the Senate. Last Wednesday, Treasury Secretary Jack Lew And the Senate in a quorum call. They return today after a week-long 4th of July break. And in about 10 minutes, they're expected to turn to the nomination of a Wyoming Attorney General to serve on the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. The Wyoming Attorney General is named Gregory Phillips. And over on the other side of the Capitol today, the House gavelled in and out. They'll be working this week on spending bills for energy and water projects for the next fiscal year. And off the floor in the House, working on a strategy to bring immigration legislation to the floor of the House. And we're just taking a look at some of the tweets coming across from members of Congress. Again, the Senate in a quorum call, taking a look at tweets from members of Congress. And any moment they're expected to turn to the nomination of a Wyoming Attorney General, Gregory Phillips, to serve on the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. And over in the House, gavelled in and out already today, they're working this week on spending bills for energy and water projects for the next fiscal year. And over on our companion network tonight, C-SPAN 3, we'll have live coverage of former CIA Director James Woolsey talking about the U.S. dependence on oil and how it affects national security. And again, that's live tonight on our companion network, C-SPAN 3, at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time.
Mr. President.
Senator from Vermont.
Consent to call out the quorum.
Without objection. Morning business is closed. Under the previous order, the Senate will proceed to executive session to consider the following nomination, which the clerk will report.
Nomination, the judiciary, Gregory Alan Phillips of Wyoming, to be United States Circuit Judge for the 10th Circuit.
Under the previous order, there will be 30 minutes for debate, equally divided and controlled in the usual form.
I don't want to cut it any way into the time of the senior senator from Wyoming, but I would hope once he's finished speaking we might make a consent request at whatever time there is. The vote still be at 5:30. Or after both he and Senator Barrasso have spoken, that once their time is consumed, that we will be able to have the vote, if possible, at 5:30, but as close to that time as possible. And I just mentioned that as not as a request, but just to say it. You know, our Constitution provides the Senate an important role in providing advice to the President, voting whether to confirm nominees for our third branch of government. Last month, we were reminded of the importance of these confirmation votes when the Supreme Court handed down several narrowly decided opinions already impacting millions of Americans. In this chamber, as probably as being the most senior member of the chamber, I voted on the confirmation of every one of the 9 justices currently serving, as well as several former justices. Since only a tiny percentage of cases brought in federal court ever end up in the Supreme Court, the federal courts of appeal are often the courts of last resort for most disputes. I'm glad we're finally voting to confirm another appellate nominee, one I will certainly vote for, Gregory Phillips, the Attorney General of Wyoming. He was appointed to that position by the Wyoming's Republican governor. He is supported by his Republican home state senators, 2 senators I respect and serve with. And with his confirmation, there'll be 10 active judges on the 10th Circuit. This means that the number of pending appeals per active judge in that court will drop up from 150 to 135. It will still keep them all very busy. But I mention that only because in the D.C. Circuit, they currently have 177 pending appeals per active judge. We all support this nominee so as to lower the pending appeals in the 10th Circuit from 150 to 135. But I do worry in the D.C. Circuit, which has a much higher caseload, that some, not the 2 senators from Wyoming, but some Senate Republicans have argued the D.C. Circuit's caseload is too low and that 3 of its judges should be eliminated. I suspect they will vote to confirm Attorney General Phillips, even though his confirmation would mean the 10th Circuit would now have the lowest caseload in the country, just as the same senators supported the confirmation of Jane Kelly to the 8th Circuit, which gave that court the lowest caseload in the country. So I hope that they will not have a double standard for the D.C. Circuit, which, of course, is a far busier circuit. Judicial nominees shouldn't be about partisan tit for tat. They impact people all across America. We need to have these judges, and I hope that we will, confirm Attorney General Phillips by the Senate. But there could be many more nominees the Senate should consider in the coming weeks. Tomorrow, the Senate Judiciary Committee will hear from James Comey, who President Obama has nominated to serve as FBI Director. And then we'll begin the process later in the week of considering the first of 3 current nominees to the D.C. Circuit, as well as the nomination of B. Todd Jones to serve as Director of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Numerous other nominees are pending. We should get to them, and I hope we will soon. I would ask consent that my full statement be made part of the record.
Without objection.
in fact, so it can help speed up things, I will yield back all time on the Democrat side, which will bring us very close to the time expected. I yield to the senior senator from Wyoming.
Mr. President.
Senator from Wyoming.
I want to thank the chairman of the Judiciary Committee for expediting the confirmation of Greg Phillips, and rise this afternoon to add strong support for the confirmation of Gregory Alan Phillips to serve as a judge on the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. I believe Mr. Phillips has all the characteristics necessary to serve as a federal appellate judge. I worked with Mr. Phillips in the Wyoming legislature and can say with confidence that he's recognized throughout Wyoming in the legal community as a talented, respected, and thoughtful attorney. This vote's also important because the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals has experienced a number of judicial vacancies recently. In February, the Senate confirmed Judge Bacharach of Oklahoma to the panel, and we now have the opportunity to fill another vacancy so the 10th Circuit can continue its work. Mr. Phillips has served as Wyoming's Attorney General since 2011. The Attorney General is not an elected position in Wyoming, and it's important to note that Mr. Phillips was appointed by Governor Meade, although they do not share the same party affiliation. This speaks tremendously to Mr. Phillips' talent and legal reputation. Governor Meade, the former U.S. Attorney, comments that Greg is a first-rate legal thinker, a tireless worker, and has an abiding sense of fair play. Governor Meade goes on to say that if confirmed, all those who appear before Mr. Phillips will find a judge fully prepared, engaged, and respectful to all. Mr. Phillips was reported out of the Senate Judiciary Committee with a unanimous vote on April 18th. The fact that he now stands for a vote after only being nominated in January is a credit to his abilities and strong bipartisan support. I want to thank Chairman Leahy, the ranking member Grassley, and members of the Judiciary Committee for reviewing and moving this nomination along so quickly. It's no surprise the American Bar Association unanimously gave Mr. Phillips its highest rating. Greg has extensive experience practicing law as a deputy county attorney and in private practice. Before becoming Wyoming's Attorney General, Mr. Phillips served 7 years as an assistant U.S. attorney for the District of Wyoming, handling criminal prosecutions and appeals. Greg has extensive experience arguing in federal court, including taking nearly 20 cases before the 10th Circuit. Mr. Phillips studied economics at the University of Wyoming and graduated with honors from the Wyoming College of Law, where he was on the Law Review. Immediately following law school, Mr. Phillips served as a clerk for the U.S. District Judge Alan Johnson of Wyoming. Judge Johnson writes that Greg is devoted to the rule of law and will honor the remarkable judicial officers who preceded him. Specifically, Judge Johnson notes that Mr. Phillips' thorough study of the U.S. sentencing guidelines, experience as a federal criminal prosecutor, and understanding of state and federal legal issues will serve him well on the 10th Circuit. Mr. Phillips also has strong support from his colleagues from around the nation. 34 attorneys general wrote the Senate Judiciary Committee in March expressing their support for the nomination. I'm told there would have been more signatures on the letter, but the nomination was advanced so diligently that some didn't get a chance to sign the letter before Greg's hearing. I'd like to conclude by saying that I can personally attest to Mr. Phillips' qualifications to serve as a federal judge. Greg was on the Senate Judiciary Committee when we served together in the Wyoming legislature. On the Senate floor, we sat across the aisle from each other. And I don't mean just across the Republican-Democrat aisle, I mean right next to each other across the aisle, and got to visit a lot. He was a part of formulating my 80% rule for legislating. Greg and his family are highly respected in their Wyoming community, and Wyoming's proud to call Greg one of our own. He'll be an outstanding judge to follow Terry O'Brien, another longtime friend of mine. Terry and I, when he was a Wyoming District Court judge and I was in the Wyoming State Senate, used to have dinner together to solve the world's problems. Then I became a United States Senator, and he became a U.S. Circuit Court judge. I know his successor will honorably fill that seat. Mr. Phillips is highly qualified to serve on the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, and I call on my colleagues to also support his confirmation. Let's get this man to work in his new job. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Junior Senator from Wyoming.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I join Senator Enzi in strongly supporting the nomination of Greg Phillips to a seat on the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. Greg Phillips will be an outstanding judge. He graduated with honors, as you've heard from Senator Enzi, from the University of Wyoming College of Law. He has worked in private practice. He's worked in the Office of the U.S. Attorney for Wyoming and currently serves as Attorney General for the state of Wyoming. The breadth of his experience, his understanding of the law, and the role of a judge, as well as the thoroughness with which he approaches his responsibilities, well, Mr. President, they will serve him well. The people who know him best, his peers, uniformly praise his intellect, his diligence, and his fairness. His former boss, U.S. District Judge Alan Johnson, said this in a recent letter to Senator Enzi. He said, again and again, local defense attorneys have expressed their appreciation for the fair-handed, respectful, and even tempered treatment they have received from Greg Phillips. We are very fortunate in Wyoming to have Greg Phillips nominated for the bench. I have no doubt that as his career continues, he will become a successful and a respected member of the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. I strongly encourage all members of the Senate to join Senator Enzi and me in voting to confirm Greg Phillips. Thank you, Mr. President, and I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
And we just heard the two Wyoming senators talk about the nomination of Wyoming Attorney General Gregory Phillips to serve on the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, and that vote expected to take place in about 3 minutes, 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Also over in the House today, they've gavelled in and out already today. They're working this week on spending bills for energy and water projects for fiscal year 2014. off the floor in the House working on a strategy to bring immigration legislation to the floor of the House. And you can watch the House when they gavel back in on our companion network, C-SPAN.
Mr. President.
Senator from Wyoming.
I'd ask we set aside the quorum call.
No objection.
And I'd also yield back the balance of any of our time and ask for the ayes and nays.
All time is yielded back. Is there a sufficient second? Sufficient second? Appears to be. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander, Ms. Aya, Ms. Baldwin, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Baucus, Mr. Begich, Mr. Bennett, Mr. Blumenthal, Mr. Blunt, Mr. Bozeman, Mrs. Boxer, Mr. Brown, Mr. Burr, Ms. Cantwell, Mr. Cardin, Mr. Carper, Mr. Casey, Mr. Chambliss, Mr. Chiesa, Mr. Coates, Mr. Coburn. Mr. Cochran. Ms. Collins. Mr. Coons. Mr. Corker. Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Cowan. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Cruz. Mr. Donnelly. Mr. Durbin. Mr. Enzi. Mrs. Feinstein. Mrs. Fisher. Mr. Flake. Mr. Franken. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mr. Graham. Mr. Grassley. Mrs. Hagan. Mr. Harkin. Mr. Hatch. Mr. Heinrich. Ms. Heitkamp. Mr. Heller. Ms. Hirono. Mr. Hoven. Mr. Inhofe. Mr. Isaacson. Mr. Johans. Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin. Mr. Johnson of South Dakota. Mr. Kane. Mr. King. Mr. Kirk. Ms. Klobuchar. Ms. Landrieu. Mr. Leahy. Mr. Lee. Mr. Levin. Mr. Manchin. Mr. McCain. Mr. McConnell. Mr. Menendez. Mr. Merkley. Ms. Mikulski. Mr. Moran. Ms. Markowski. Mr. Murphy. Mr. Nelson. Mr. Paul. Mr. Portman. Mr. Pryor. Mr. Reed of Rhode Island. Mr. Reed of Nevada. Mr. Risch. Mr. Roberts. Mr. Rockefeller. Mr. Rubio. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Schatz. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Scott. Mr. Sessions. Mrs. Shaheen. Mr. Shelby. Ms. Stabenow. Mr. Tester. Mr. Thune. Mr. Toomey. Mr. Udall of Colorado. Mr. Udall of New Mexico. Mr. Vitter. Mr. Warner. Ms. Warren. Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Wicker. Mr. Wyden. Senators voting in the affirmative: Alexander, Baldwin, Barrasso, Blumenthal, Bozeman, Boxer, Brown, Burr, Cardin, Carper, Casey, Chambliss, Chiesa, Coburn, Cochran, Coons, Cowan, Crapo, Donnelly, Enzi, Feinstein, Fisher, Franken, Gillibrand, Grassley, Hatch, Heller, Hirono, Isaacson, Johans, Johnson of Wisconsin, Johnson of South Dakota, Kane, Kirk, Klobuchar, Leahy, Manchin, Nelson, Reed of Rhode Island, Roberts, Sanders, Schatz, Sessions, Shelby, Udall of Colorado, Udall of New Mexico, Vitter, Warner, Whitehouse, Wicker, Wyden. No senator voted in the negative. Mr. Lee, aye. Mr. Merkley, aye. Mr. Scott, aye. Ms. Collins, aye. Mrs. Shaheen, aye. Mrs. Hagan, aye. Mr. Risch, aye. Mr. Murphy, aye. Mr. Paul, aye. Mr. Heinrich, aye. Mr. Hoven, aye. Mrs. McCaskill, aye. Mr. Pryor, aye. Ms. Mikulski, aye. Mr. Portman, aye. Mr. Menendez, aye. Mr. Tester, aye. Mr. Thune, aye. Mr. Levin, aye. Mr. Blunt, aye. Ms. Warren, aye. Ms. Ayotte, aye. Mr. Rockefeller, aye. Ms. Landrieu, aye. Mr. Moran. Mr. Moran, aye. Mr. Baucus. Mr. Baucus, aye. Mr. Corker. Mr. Corker, aye. Mr. Harkin. Mr. Harkin, aye. Mr. Cornyn, aye. Mr. McConnell. Mr. McConnell, aye. Mr. Durbin, aye. Mr. Begich, aye. Mrs. Murray, aye. Mr. Bennett, aye. Ms. Stabenow, aye. Mr. Schumer, aye. Mr. Reed of Nevada. Mr. Reed of Nevada, aye.